So today I want to talk about strategies. That's strategies in the NLP sense rather than any other business sense. So in the NLP sense, a strategy is a sequence of thoughts, if you like. Technically, the definition is that it's a sequence of internal and external representations that consistently delivers the same result. So in more plain English, what that means is it's a thought process that achieves a certain end result. So we have a strategy for something like making a decision. We have a strategy for learning. We have strategies for relaxing. We have strategies, well, for everything that we do, in fact. There isn't any time that you're not running a strategy, because even if you think you're not doing anything, then you're running a strategy for doing nothing. And actually, is your brain ever doing nothing? So one of the questions I often get asked when people first meet the idea of strategies is when we talk about, for example, a strategy for learning or a strategy for making a decision or a strategy for convincing somebody of something or whatever it is, people often say to me, well, is it really true that I would use the same strategy regardless of what it is that I'm learning or that I'm deciding about? And one of the common areas for that is that we all have strategies for making a buying decision. So if you decide that you want to buy yourself a new pair of shoes or a new car or a new camera or a new house or whatever it is, there is a thought process that you will go through in order to achieve that. And many people at first glance will say, I find it hard to believe that I would use the same thought process to make a decision about a new pair of shoes as I would about buying a house. And in general, most people do in fact use the same thought process. But every now and again, what you will find is that your normal way of doing something doesn't work. So I'll give you an example of this. Recently, I went on holiday. And normally when I go on holiday, what I like to do is sit on a sun lounger and read. Now, in the old days, before we had electronic book readers, I used to have to go with a suitcase full of books. And I do mean a suitcase full of books. It would not be unusual for me to take a dozen different books on holiday with me. And I like to read things that are, pretty thick. So that would make for a very heavy suitcase. So a couple of years ago, my parents gave me a gift of a Kindle, which really has transformed my holiday packing, as you can imagine. But what I discovered in the run-up to my recent holiday was that my usual way of deciding what books to buy just wasn't working. Because ordinarily, if I'm buying what I think of as proper books, I'd go to my local bookstore and I would cruise around and look at books and pick them up and handle them and read what it says on the front and the back and so on, and eventually come away, usually with an armful of books. So in the run-up to my holiday, one of the things on my list of things to do was to put some books onto my Kindle. And that item sat on my to-do list for quite a long time, until one day I looked at it and thought, okay, why am I not doing that? Because I like buying books. It's one of my pleasures in life. So why am I not putting books on my Kindle? And I realised it's because I didn't have a strategy for deciding which books to put on my Kindle. And I thought, well, hold on, I've had this thing for a couple of years now. How come I haven't got a strategy for doing it? And what I realised was that previously, all I'd done was if there was a book that I'd already decided I wanted to read and hadn't got round to, then I would simply go and get that and put it on my Kindle. But when it came to, I don't know what I want to read, I just didn't have a way of doing that using my Kindle. So that was why it wasn't getting done. So that's something just to think about is if there's something on your to-do list that's not getting done, it may be because you don't have a strategy for doing it. So here's what I did. I thought, well, okay, if I was going to go and buy books for my holiday, what would I do? I'd go to my bookstore. So I thought, okay, well, I could do that. I could go and spend an hour in the bookstore and I could write down a list of books. But that's going to be time consuming. So perhaps the next nearest equivalent is to go to an online bookstore and have a look around. Okay, but how do you look around an online bookstore? So the recommendations, which I guess is the equivalent of the table at the front of the bookstore, which has all the latest releases and the things that the booksellers like. You're probably getting an idea of which bookstore I usually shop in. And so I thought, well, I could go and look around at recent releases. I could look at some of the writers that I know I like. And I could also look at the recommendations of, okay, if I'm going to buy this book, what other things have people before me bought? But, that was a completely new way of doing something. So I'm sure you'll be relieved to hear that I did in fact manage to buy enough books to last me through my holiday. But the important thing about this is it made me realise that quite frequently we have opportunities to start from scratch and figure out a new way of doing something, especially when we find ourselves in a new environment. And sometimes the old ways of doing things aren't going to work. So here's my challenge for you. Have a look at your to-do list and notice what's on there that just isn't getting done. And figure out, do you already have a strategy for doing this? Or is it somewhere where you could actually start from scratch and design a whole new way of operating? Have fun.